Okay, everyone. So we're going to start off our second half. We're going to start with Tarah. Go for it.
I think it was September 21. Yeah, it was. And all of us kids, we were really happy. We had a really long, fun summer vacation. But I was a little nervous, but excited to return to school. So it was my first day of first grade. And my new teacher, she was beautiful. And she was holding this huge bottle full of toys and candy to welcome me to my new year of school. But this one boy, this short, pig-nosed boy with rosy cheeks, yeah, he ran in past everybody and he buried his hand in the candy. Yep. He plunged his arm all the way in up to his elbow. He grabbed all the candies he could. And then he was crying, trying to get his fat hand out because the neck of the jar, it was too skinny and he was stuck. That boy, he screamed and he freaked out. But lucky for him, his best friend, this tall, skinny boy with thick glasses, he was standing nearby. And he said, dude, take only one piece of candy so you can get your hand out with something. Duh.
Yay, thank you. Now we're going to go next. We've got Susan going next.
Coming to Paradise, Part 2. So there I was, barefoot in a snowstorm, but on the road to freedom. My first ride was with a creepy trucker, and I made sure this came almost immediately to an end once we got farther down the road. My next ride was with a sweet chap in a pickup truck, and he took me to a general store farther up the mountainous road where travelers might be able to take me farther than he could. He says to me, I have some shoes at home. What size do you wear? I can go get them. 20 minutes later, he shows up with a pair of his mom's army boots. I kid you not, but I wanted to be warm, so I took them. They rather mismatched my old-fashioned winter coat, and I was an overall mess, but I was free, so what the hell? A kind and intellectual gentleman became my next ride, and he actually took me to a restaurant where I had my first real meal in weeks. It was here that he asked me if I wanted to continue down Highway 5, or did I want to go to a nearby college town, Chico, where another student might want to ride to another college town. That sounded logical to me, so off we went to Chico. He took me to the student center, and I went straight to the ride board, but no rides to Chico. No harm, I thought, with renewed vigor and the joy of knowing I may never have to see JR again. I'll just go back to the highway and stick out my thumb. It's a good thing I talked to my higher power earlier in the day about turning myself over to you completely today, because it was then that a real miracle occurred. I was close to the entrance ramp, and I saw a tree full of oranges. I grabbed one for later consumption, turned toward the ramp, and walked towards it. As soon as I got there, I walked up towards the highway, took a few steps, heard a car, and turned around to face it with an extended thumb. The timing was perfect because the man pulled over. I got inside and I immediately felt comfortable with him once he spoke. I could tell he was both Jewish and from New York, just like me. He told me to be careful as it was getting dark outside and mentioned that he had a good woman friend in nearby Paradise. She might let you stay there overnight and I could come back for you in the morning and take you back to the highway, he suggested. I answered with an uncharacteristically flippant remark, no doubt sparked by my newfound strength. Just left hell, might as well go to paradise. When I arrived at the home of a woman named Priscilla, the whole house felt like it was bathed in a warm glow. She lived in the middle of the forested community of Paradise. Yes, the very same place that almost completely burned down a couple of years ago. The driver relayed my story to Priscilla, and she listened intently and wanted to help. Sorry, the phone's ringing. I took a shower and it felt heavenly. I borrowed some of her clothes because she was thin like me. And we stood next to the fireplace to keep warm and to talk things over. I remember there was a little ceramic figure on the mantelpiece that had a Bible verse on it that amazingly had the same numbers as the date of my liberation, but unfortunately also bore the name of my ex-captor, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he sent his one and only Son, so that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Well, I certainly felt like I got my life back, so I saw this as a good sign. Through the front door that evening came a tall, thin gentleman who sat in a chair in Priscilla's living room. She introduced me to Jerry, who worked in her former husband's upholstery shop in the barn on her property. I didn't know what caused me to feel pangs of sadness in my heart as he sat there, drank some coffee, said a few words, and then left for home. When the driver came by the next morning, Priscilla said that I needed to stay with her for a while to come back down to earth and heal a bit. She had come to me in the middle of the night in a dream, sitting in a chair right next to the bed in that guest bedroom, answering all kinds of questions for me about the fears that I had developed over the last 2 years. She kept saying, oh, don't even worry about that, and so on. I felt safe and so freaking happy to be in a warm bed. The next morning, Jerry asked me out to dinner because he wanted to figure out who this strange chick was that was staying with Priscilla. It was St. Patrick's Day, and my new housemate had lent me some garish green velvet suit that I then wore. And I'm sure Jerry thought that I was completely nuts, because I was. Nonetheless, we still hung out almost every night after that in the barn, smoking pot, listening to music, with him sewing antique car upholstery and me dancing around. He was such a lovely person, just such a gentle soul, a kind and gentle person from a small town, a sharp contrast to the man I had just left. I would do odd jobs and go to thrift shops with Priscilla during the day, and at night, I'd hang out with Jerry. Day 10 was a Friday night, the day ruled by Venus, the day of love. And I got very high and was dancing around and soon sat across from him and watched him while he sewed on his industrial machine. At one point, this really romantic song came on the radio. I would love to know which one. And we glanced up at one another, our fingers met, and I floated around the table to be with him. I sat in his lap, We embraced and fairly quickly made love. I felt like there were angels in the rafters and that the whole dance was orchestrated by a force greater than either of us. We sat in complete silence for what seemed like a half an hour, and at one point he said, I should go. And that's when I reassured him that, don't worry, I haven't had my period in 2 years, so I can't get pregnant. Famous last words. I was ovulating that night, and into conception came my first child, Elijah, who is now almost 40 years old and a robotics engineer. I went to bed, and although I didn't know anything about chakras, each one of them just lit up and became a conduit for powerful energy rushing through my body from top to bottom all night long. I thought to myself, maybe this is what it means to have a real orgasm. I lived there with Priscilla and did not tell my mother I was pregnant for 5 months because I knew she would make me get an abortion. And Priscilla had said that that wouldn't be good for me and we'll find a way to take care of the baby. When I finally did tell my mother, she coughed for like 5 minutes straight on the phone and was shocked and rather furious and was out on the next plane to San Francisco on a Friday the 13th in August. I spent a humiliating day with her, forcing me to face my old professors and my old landlady to whom I owed about $10 for a phone bill. That evening, we went to visit our nearest relatives in Santa Cruz and decided that I would live there when I had the baby. I met a fascinating character that night, a woman named Rayaya, a Rastafarian, and I wanted to live with her to learn the first thing about motherhood. I liked the way she talked with her young son in a dignified manner, calling him little man and not using what I labeled baby talk. Months later in the forest, outside of Santa Cruz, living with Rayaya, Eli was born on his due date in 35 minutes, just before midnight. I always said he liked to do things right and budding engineer. And so he was saying, hey, Mom, it's almost midnight. Aren't I supposed to be born today? So after 1 or 2 contractions that day and the chanting of a mantra that someone told me would be good for labor, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, I finally went into the bathroom at 11 p.m., looked in the mirror and said, okay, I'm ready. As soon as I said that, waves of laboring energy suddenly created a unique sound and movement for each and every chakra, starting at the top and forcing its way down, ending with a loud grunt at the lowest one, the root, coming at me every other minute. This was a direct homage to the rushing energy I had felt on the night of his creation. The midwife was late, but my cousins arrived to catch the baby. Eli was born in the veil, which means part of the placenta is left intact around the head. I looked down and said, what's that? And my cousin B, the elder cousin, just instinctively took her thumbs and pulled up an edge of the placenta to reveal a crying but beautiful baby. I later learned that this veil phenomenon was rare and that there was an old midwife's tale that these children are very psychic, very fortunate, and protected by elves and fairies. My cousin Sheriff, 16 at the time, was the first person to hold the baby, and I was delighted that my son was blessed with her grace and her gentle, loving arms en route to me. Not only was this the highest night of my life, and I wasn't even on drugs, but it was also the 8th day of Hanukkah and a Sufi holiday. Cousin B promptly set up an altar with gems and gifts and a picture of her now deceased husband, whose birthday had been the exact same day. She also put a menorah with all the candles lit. I later found out that a child born on the 8th day of Hanukkah with all the candles lit is so full of light that when they enter a room, everybody takes notice. They really stand out. Well, Eli has certainly grown into that. He's blossomed into that beautiful light, I assure you. Here he is. Although everything happened so quickly and smoothly that night, I was in a state of both chaos and wonderment. And after a good night's sleep next to my baby, I finally felt like a mother. This started a lifelong journey which taught me about my own inner child and about, most importantly, how to love. I had no idea that children were meant to be their parents' greatest teacher, each one equipped with their own set of lessons. This flow of knowledge goes back and forth between parent and child, like a tide in the sea of consciousness, guided by the mind of God. May our own higher power bless us with our helpers and teachers who guide us in this as we find our way in this complicated world.
Thank you, Susan. Coco, are you ready?
I have been literally biting my tongue, rebirthing myself incessantly, reincarnating in my own cells, pulling visceral wool from weavings of my own placenta to recover the parts of a missing child that was corrupted. But she grows in my womb over and over again. Every time retrieving an arm, a leg, mending a broken bone, a ruptured tissue, an absent piece of flesh stolen in a heinous act of patriarchy, all magnetized back to her and her muscles again. Growing strong every time I birth her perfect, delicate, innocent body. She's a newborn of apple, may, and magnolia, a newborn of clover and mint, a newborn of earth and fire. She's a ceremony. She's a ceremony. I am a ceremony. Like a ritual, she conjures her own presence to every space vacated when violated, now inhabited by the brightest and most honest brilliancy. So I bite my tongue, but not because I am to remain silent, or because my voice shall stay swirling with its truths of shrills of devastation or creation. No, I bite my tongue to get the elixir of songs, the healing spells embedded inside my own mouth, the flavors of justice and freedom, the poems and the prayers of justice and freedom all inside of my mouth. It's an existence that my breath learned to be a vessel for. And so I bite my tongue. And every time that she's born, acquainted with herself in the intimacy of my heartbeat more and more. Each time of birth, moving like babies do, to the rhythm of a vast field of wildflowers. I bite my tongue to swallow the nourishing juice of my own voice, to kiss her and anoint her forehead with unconditional love. I bite my tongue.
Thank you, Coco. Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and finish or do my piece now. 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. This piece is called Libations. Once upon a time once upon. I was reading tarot here in the ancient mountains of Appalachia at a place called the Hawk and the Hawthorn. The Hawk and the Hawthorn sits on a field of yarrow, a deep herb of great medicine and protection. It physically binds wounds and builds cells. It was used magically in weddings or ceremonies to bond marriages. And ironically, in its previous years, this place was where people got married. In my amazement, I had never seen a whole field of yarrow, and it was an honor to be there that day. The lore of yarrow grew within me. It told me that in ancient times, these lands were meant for medicine, that these mountains were natural hospitals a long time ago. No one lived here. People only came to let their sick lie on the land and be healed by the plants and then leave. Even downtown Asheville and all along the French Broad River was where mothers were brought to have their babies. These are ancient stories, before there were tribes, when all remembered connection to each other and all that is. An elder came and sat at my table that day, and we talked of Asheville, ancient Asheville, and then we began to smell sea salt in the air. And sometimes in Asheville, on beautiful days, you can smell a sea breeze, like the ocean is near. And I said, "Do you smell that?" And he smiled and he said, "Yes." And we talked of how these ancient mountains thousands of years ago used to be underwater. And that's why we could still smell the sea breeze. And he said to me, "Can you keep a secret?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Some believe that this was the promised land where Jesus and Mary Magdalene lived." And my body started shaking with excitement. And then I got a download. We must be the ancient ones who've come home. And then we were quiet for a moment. And he said, "I want to tell you another secret." And I said, "Okay." He said, "Another reason why we can smell the sea breeze is because there is a parallel world where we are still underwater as we speak." And I got chills. It was a hot day and I got chills. as confirmation. It was spirit saying yes. And I was instantly transformed into my mermaid self. I could see water all around me. I became less particle and more wave. And all the scattered parts of myself became harmonized. Crystallized, realized, binded by the yarrow, my lore was born. So I wanted to invite you to experience the multi-dimensional world, the shift over to the parallel world for one moment, to take some oceanic breaths with me. I invite you to take a deep inhale and a long exhale. And imagine that you have gills and that you're a mermaid and that you are swimming under water. You make me feel like the ocean. You make me feel like the ocean. And this colorist is pulled by the moon, washed up on your beach. I can feel the violet horizon. You make me feel like the ocean. Thank you. So we wanted to give some moments, some time, at least 5 minutes more. So if anybody wanted to give any positive feedback or some of the cool things that they saw this evening or heard this evening, we would love to hear some feedback. Even if you wanted to write it in the chat, that is also cool if you're feeling shy.